In this video help, we're going to be beginning on the billing and payments popovers and the relationship they have with the application. What I'm going to do is bring it up and talk a little bit about the billing. What happens in an application normally is that I would create an invoice, and what happens, the invoices are uniquely identified by an invoice number. Well, in this application, over usage of the last several years, it was noted that for a client itself, you would have to go search for that client in the invoice for all the invoices to find out which invoices this client had in the past and what was the data that was in those invoices that are important. Now, in this particular record we're looking at here, you can see that there's actually a balance on this particular client that's related to this record. Now, when you create an income type of an item, this would be a accounts receivable billing. The accounts receivable billing is based on all the invoices that this client has had over a period of time. Now, when I created this application, I wanted to be able to have you look at all of the invoiced items that this client has ever had. As you add each one of these records, you're actually putting them into a global invoice for this particular ID for this client. And if you look at it, you can see for the individual client that he's paid so far $130 and he has $696 in unpaid balances. Over a period of time, what's going to happen, you're going to see where some clients have a running balance due. Now, what does this mean to you? As you are doing a business setup and you're using this application, you made certain choices about how you run your business. For example, in a rental business, an individual person or a business may come in, and if you're looking at both the individual and or the business, the number of invoices and the chain of different items in the invoice may be for one day or over a period of dates. And yet that invoice would have normally been multiple invoices. When you're looking at the income records and accounts receivable, you'll see that because they're all listed here, and you can look through all the previous payments and stuff that have been made or not made, and if there's balances, for example, in the notes field, with a drop down, you have a whole slew of different kinds of things that you can put in there that are related to the income for accounts receivable. So for example, not all of these are used in this particular instance, but there are things like paid in full, invoiced, and pay on delivery, quote, deliver to the client site, and pickup. Now, all of these kinds of things relate to how you bill a client. For example, if you go to a client's place and you're going to put stuff at their site, where you're going to go ahead and drag it out to their site, and that's certain businesses do that and other ones don't. Well, it's available to you to do that, or you can have the client put a required deposit in, and when you're doing that and you're changing these particular settings for the notes, these things are important because as you look down through all the invoices, they may have different requirements as far as the notes are concerned. When you're doing a find, for example, in the actual portal, and you want to look at ID number 1 or John Smith, either way, but if you had multiple John Smiths, it's better to use the 1 and John Smith. And then I want to look for this individual status in the notes. Say, for example, I want to see all of them that are balance due. And then I could look at the list view up here, and this is the invoice long that I'm talking about that has all the lines. I can either look for things in that listing, or I can go to the billing listing and see all of the different things that are related to billing for everybody, and then there I can do a find. Now, you cannot do a find in this screen specifically because it's a multi-line report, and that's what I've talked to you about as far as the data that's in here is not usable as far as looking for an individual thing unless you go to the portal, which is this button over here. If you go to the portal, then you're able to look at all the records in the entire database, or pick out a certain client and client ID to look at only their records. Now, obviously, looking at them on this screen now makes it a little easier to find information because you're going to see all the individual invoice items that this guy has. So for each line, it's an item. Let's read this one. On this date, he rented a 3/8 drill. Its cost is $8 per day. He had it for 16 days for $128. If there was taxes on this, you could put in the tax rate by using the drop down, and this can be edited to put your own tax rates in here. So in this case, we actually use the tax rate, like 0.9 would be 09, which is 9%. You can put in there up to 4 digits on this in the actual tax rate, and what that would do is give you the options so that you can see what the micro tax rate is doing to you. In this case, here's an 0.0700. Now in this area here we have 9.358 is our tax rate. So I would put that in there and I would select it. But you have the option obviously to add more than one, so you can have them. So in some states, like when I lived in Pennsylvania, clothing was not taxed. And there are other states that have these kinds of rules where taxes are there or not there. So on an individual row basis, you can assign or not assign taxes. Whatever you put in here is going to take the 128 and it's going to assign that tax to the actual line total. So tax rate is really kind of a important thing because it added $8.96 to the actual billing for that row alone. So in this case, the line total for that particular item in this case was $136.96. Balance is due. Now as the client is paying his bills, you can take and go to the, for example, the long invoice, and you can see all the items that are in the long invoice that are related to this particular client. And you can see he's got the ID number 1. Now if you open up this particular screen and you're not looking at the client that you want, you would go over and do a find, start the find, and what you can do is you can search. In this case, the way the invoice is set up, you can actually search any of these rows and any of these rows, because this is not what we would normally call a multi-line individual line invoice. This is specifically a report that I've modified so that it acts like a multi-line list, but it's actually a report. So if I want to look at the individual item or items that have a balance due, I would do the start find, and I would pick in this status over here what it is that I'm looking for. Paid in fulls, all of those, or pay on delivery, pay on return. If there were quotes in here when they come up on this screen, I could omit the quotes from the entire invoice data by picking things that are saying invoiced. For example, invoiced is where you actually invoiced your client, and did he pay it or not? You can tell that. If you invoiced him, those items will be shown as invoiced but not paid because the balance is still due. When we get to payments, you're going to see how this affects the client and each one of these line items. Okay, for example, what we're going to do in this case, if you did the, and I'm going to simulate it, if you start the find, you can either use this field and drop it down to pick the client that you're looking for, and it will put it in like ID 1, and ID 1 would be John Smith. Now you can also do a search based on John Smith and ID number 1. Then you can do a ID, John Smith, and if there's a balance due, it's going to show you all the balance dues for that particular thing. Now the reports will do a similar thing. So if you're doing for example, if you're looking at a list view or the report for the, let's go over here, if you're looking for billing report, you can go ahead and click on the billing report, and you can see in the billing report, here's John Smith, ID 1, the date of the individual transaction, and what will happen in the report is going to tell you all the information about that particular line item for the billing and accounts receivable. It's going to give you the tax, it's going to sum the tax, it's going to give you the base as far as the before taxes, summarize that. Then it's going to take the line total and give you the line total. This is based on this one record. If you put multiple records in here that have a balance due on them, what's going to happen, you're going to see all of the balance dues that are in here and the total amount as far as these totals, because these are record summaries and grand summary. The record summary will be for the individual record, and then there'll be another record, and that one will have its individual, and then at the bottom of the report it's going to summarize all those items for John Smith ID 1. If you do a find, as you recall, you have to click on the Run Report to bring back the header at the top of the screen here. So, for example, if I did a find and it showed up all the records but it didn't have this header, you're not going to know that you have this particular client unless you look here. And if you're mixing them and you see them all, they're going to be, obviously if I don't put an ID and I don't put a name, I'm going to get all the records that relate to something like balance due. There may be a time where you want to run this report for all the balance dues, and as you look at each individual record for its record summary, you're going to see all the people and what the balances are for those people. Okay? So let's go ahead and look on the next thing. We're going to click on this button and it's going to take us back to the billing screen. And again, if you look at here, you're going to see the same kind of a thing on balance dues. You can look here as well to see all the balance dues and the summary of the balance dues for this particular client and the amount that they paid to date. And what this will do is it'll summarize as you add more individual bills in here. It's going to run these things up like all the tax, all the subtotals, and all the billing items that are in there. And then if you want to look at the individual one again, you would use the portal to jump over there. Okay, let's look at the billing listing again. The billing listing is a running record of all the bills for all the different clients. And what we did is we hang the note out here so you can see the note. And this is a nice way of putting them in a more individualized way where all the items there for all the different items that are in accounts receivable. And this status is quite important because if you do a find now, maybe I'm looking for all the invoiced, maybe I'm looking for all the paid in fulls, maybe I'm looking for pay on returns or quotes or whatever it may be. I can pull those records, and as I pull those records, I can look at the individual record by clicking here and seeing in the portal that particular record and the data for that line item in the particular thing for all the balances individually. So I can see what it was for, in this case electric drill, but if there's more of these items, you would have to go over here and go to the next item. For example, I go next, and there's no more next, so we're looking at the only bill in there. I can also use these, what I call quick links, to go to look at the report and be able to see in the report instantly what is going on with this particular billing. So this is how you would do the accounts receivable. Now, looking at the accounts receivable and understanding what you're going to do reflects directly on the client payments. If you are in a process and you're at your cash register and you're going to bill out a person, what you would do is obviously create the assignment first. Based on the assignment, you would know by looking in that screen for this particular person whether or not they closed out any of these items so far. I mean, did they bring the items back? Are they back? And of course the status in here is returned, pending, or whatever. Now I'm going to relate this to what's available, delivery, in service, pending reservation, rented, replaced, or returned. Now when somebody comes back and they've done, for example, this thing is changed from being rented, then it becomes available. What you're going to do is you're going to change the status to available. What that does is it means that this transaction should have been completed. All the data that's supposed to be in here should be in here. In this particular case, we showed a rented date and a rented return time. One thing that's missing here is it doesn't have a rented time. This thing went out at a certain time. And this can happen, but you can see it with all this stuff for this particular client. It's going to be obvious that this guy picked it up and took the rental item out at a certain time. So you can look really quick to see if all these things are up to date. And what you would do is put back in the time that's required. Now obviously that would make a modified change and it showed the date that it was modified. If it comes back and it is a returned item and if the transaction is completed, you have to make the decision to say, okay, we're going to change the status to return, or if it's available, say for example there's no service required, we would go ahead and make it available so that it can be used by other people in the application, so that if they, say for example ID 12 wanted this item now and you needed one, or you're holding for something for it to come back, you can take and look in here for this particular item based on a search within the database as items that are issued or available, and you can tell instantly that that item by that particular serial number is now pending reservation, so it's on hold. And this carries through all the different records. So if I did, say for example, I went to ID2 and I'm looking for a 3/8 inch drill, I'm going to see that that's pending a reservation for this particular one with that serial number. So I'm not going to try to issue that one. I would want to look at another one, and I can go over the equipment listing and see all the ones that are available and I can go into the portal and do a search for the available ones. Or I can just look here and see that all these things would be available, and I can look for another one. But you have to do the search within the portal in order to find like a 3/8 inch drill. So those are the kind of things. Now, how does this impact you at the cash register on checkout? Well, as you have looked at the individual assigned equipment for this individual, and you add a line item in here for the items that are going out on rentals, you would create a record in here for the one that's actually used. You make the decision, are you going to have him pay up front? Are you going to deliver it somewhere and pick up the payment for accounts receivable at the location where it's at? Or whatever it might be. For example, the guy, you're going to wait for him to return him, to bill him, but you may want to put in for example, oops, sorry, that's my fault. Now that's a good thing to show you. If you click off of it, you can click in any other field and then go back over here, and then you can say delivery available, rented, replace, or returned. Now, in this particular case, if I wanted to add another one, maybe I need a new line item in here that says available, or not available, but something else. Go to the top of the screen and under equipment status, go over and create what you need. Now, I would suggest be careful, because anything that has a colored field like this, if you add a line item in there, it's not going to be colored anymore. It's going to be white only. So if you add to the list and create a new line item, and as far as the drop down is concerned, it will not color. But for example, when it's returned or rented, you may want to look at all the items that are rented for 3/8 drills. So I would go over to the portal and I would say I'd use this and say rented to see all of them, or I would go over and do a search for all the available 3/8 inch drills, and that way you go ahead and do that. Now, going back to what we were talking about, creating the record. For each rental, as you're going out, if you're going to send the item out on a rental and you've got the dates and the dates for the return and all the other information in here, you would go right over, and now you don't have to change screens. You can basically say, okay, this item, I need to bill it because it's something that I haven't finished, it's not returned, for example. I would go over, and if I'm going to pay right at the time that the guy's standing in front of me, I would create the billing, and I'd put in the 3/8 inch drill, and I would assume that I already have the rate, I have the days that it's going to be out based on what I put into the record on the other side. There's going to be 16 days. The average rate will calculate to the 128. Now, you would have the guy pay for it, put the tax on it if you're going to do it. If you have 2 or 3 items, those would be listed in here as far as the items that you're going to create for the billing. As you create the new record, for example, if I click down here, I could say, in this case, this is from the equipment screen, we would have something in here as far as a piece of equipment. Like I would pick the drill, and you can see at the end of it, it has the rate right in there where it's showing you the $8 within the rate. These items do not have a rate because they're decided, like a deposit or whatever is set on the equipment at the time that you're actually creating the invoice item. Now, so as I'm creating all these invoice items, this doesn't really take so long. It's because some of these things are already added for you. So what you want to do is go ahead and create, say there's 4 items that this guy's going to rent, and he's going to put them in all today. So you have the today over here where you'd pick it. You go to the next item, you put the date for that item, you pick the item, and as you're going down the list. Now obviously you're going to see that when you create that, if you're not going to pay it today, or it's not going to be covered today, or you're going to do individual ones and you're going to charge at the time that he's standing in front of you, you can do that. If he brings it back and there's a late charge, you would come back in and create the late charge right here, and then go ahead and add that to the billing amount, and it should be paid at the time that the guy comes back. So depending on the nature of your business, do you charge everything up front? No, you don't. If there's a late fee, that would be added to the invoice, and it would be added as far as an item that's due at the time that it's returned. But what this is doing, it's allowing you to manipulate the information a lot easier than going to an individual invoice and then bouncing back to this screen to see if it's got an item assigned to this particular client. This way you see everything for this client all in one screen. Then you would see all the items that have a balance due, or that they are whatever status it may be, pay on return or pay on delivery or whatever it may be. And then of course you can go over and do a search for this and find anything that's odd that you want to look at, or you can create an invoice, for example, for a quote. We haven't talked about yet. If I created a quote and this guy wants to know what the sum of a bill for all these items would be, I could have this as a quote field, and then say a couple of days later he wants to actually come in and rent all the stuff that he wanted. The quote doesn't affect anything that's in inventory until you actually do the transaction. So if this is the guy that's going to be using the 8th drill and you put it into the equipment assignment record, you would probably want to say pending reservation or whatever, and that way, if for example you could change the assignment to another piece of equipment if it is because this one was rented while you were waiting and it was quoted but not actually assigned. So there's a lot of flexibility. When I created this application, I stated that they can be customized. I want to point out that customization is available as far as the design is concerned, like the fields and their relationships and how they work as far as in the database, but it cannot be done on something that's compiled. What does that mean? For example, if this is Windows or Mac and I create the application for that entity, device, that means that I cannot modify that particular design after it's compiled. So you're kind of living with the design as far as what it was done then, unless you return the entire application, and then everything would have to be exported and imported to a new version. Say like you wanted all this data to be put into an iPad application. I would have to go in and then export all the data in all these records for all the different records that you used, and then go ahead and put it into a new application. I cannot create an application like this other than taking the data through export and creating, say, like an iPad or an iPhone app. So just that you know that that's available. So we're talking here accounts receivable, balance dues, and so forth. And as we stated before, you can go over to the individual record and then do a search over here using the find to find specific records. Now anything that you do here as far as a find in this record will affect the list view. For example, I went over to billing listing. Only the items, say for example, that you just searched for will be shown here. The same thing goes for if you go to the invoice and look at the invoice, that same thing, and the report would also show only the items that you found in your found set. That's what it's called, a found set of items. Once again, if you need to get everything back, you would say show all within the list view. So if I go over to the listing and there were, say, 120,000 records in here, I could say only find the items that I'm looking for by doing a find, or if I'm looking for everything, I would come back and say show all records and click on that, and all the records be shown. I could omit a record if I needed to, or I could look at the omitted ones in reverse. Okay. If you need help and you don't understand exactly what's going on, click on the app help, and what it'll do is it'll give you the link to all the different videos so you can see those videos. If that doesn't help you and you're still confused, go to the developer support, and what we'll do is we'll walk you through all of that. Okay, let's go back to the main screen here. You can see how I just popped right through those. Payments. Payments are a little different. You can pay all the invoices in one lump sum if you want to, based on the outstanding balance that you see up here for a particular client. So John Smith item 1, for everything that is not paid, the summary total for the unpaid or balance due is here. Now, if you create a record and you don't pay all the balance, what you can do is show the amount. Here's the amount due totally. When you did the first one, it was $136.96 for total. and he paid $130. And I'm only using this as an example because some bills can be $1,500, and they pay $1,000, maybe leave a balance for whatever reason. And this is your attitude about different kinds of people or the business, the way you want to run it, how they pay their bills. So in this particular case, I have a balance that's an outstanding amount for $6.96. What you would do in this particular case, if it's unpaid and he comes back, or you bill him and he's going to send you a check, as you receive the check or whatever it is, you would come over here and say amount due, in this case, is $6.96. If you now pay that $6.96, then the balance due will turn to zero. So if I'm looking at the reports and everything for the billing and the billing report, in this case I can go to list view and I can see the balance dues. I can go into the billing listing and look for balance dues. I can go to the report and print the report. Say for the client wants a billing report for all of his outstanding billing, then you would go ahead and do that, and you would look for everything that has a balance due as far as the client records. You can do a search for the accounts receivable for balance due, and then go ahead and look at all the outstanding payments, or do a search in the payments report over here, and you can do the same thing. So here's the payment report, balance dues and everything. As they're paid and unpaid, you're going to see them stacking up when you look for the individual that has items that are required for payment. And how do you do that? For example, if I'm looking at the balance, I can go over here, and I'm going to show you how you do this. You do a find, and you're going to put in under the balance due, you could take and put greater than or equal to, and I'm going to put 50 cents. And the reason I'm going to do that, everything over 50 cents will show up if it's a balance due for any of the records that are in here. So I'll say perform the find, and it's going to show all the records for that one. I'm going to say return, run the report, and now I see that this is the records that have a balance due greater than this amount for this record, and it's going to show those items that are outstanding that have a balance due on them. And of course, if you have multiple records in here that have balance dues, it's going to really address those particular records. And now I can go ahead and click on this, and then go in and see all the payments that are due with a balance on them. In this case, here's the balances. And you can also use these to jump over, look at the payment report and billing report. Now obviously you've seen how to pay the items in the payment over here. What if you did a situation where you did a long-term payment for a client that's, say, a business, and he has a lot of different invoices? This will all be listed in here by payments that have been made, but if you say you wanted to create a record and have the total amount due in here, you could create the record but don't show any payments in this particular case, and it'll show the entire balance that's due over here. That way it would show in the report for a completely amount due in this particular case. So I put 136.36. I don't put any amount paid, so the whole balance will be in here. And now when I go to the payment report, I can see the entire amounts that are billed, and I can pick through these and pay individual months or whatever as far as the amounts due. It depends on how you want to bill them to your client. So I would show items that, like for example, this one's due, or there may be an overlay for a balance, so I put in what I paid, what was paid each time, so I don't have to pay the entire balance. What I'm saying, on this particular date, if he paid the six amount, or maybe you had to pay the 130 on that day and leave a balance, you can see how you can run your accounts receivable and payments that are out there and waiting for him to pay those bills. Now, running the report, obviously, for an individual or all clients, you could see all clients, but what you'd want to do is you'd want to do a search based on balance dues in order to see those individuals that owed money and haven't paid it yet. Now, if you have any questions about this and how it works, you'll realize after using it for a short period of time, it gives you a lot of flexibility, especially when you're in the invoicing area over here, and you can see all that status for all the different line items that are in the invoice, and you can do this for the entire client's balances for all of them, or you can do it and pick through there and say find only balance dues, or the different statuses here. For example, he has a deposit required, or it's invoiced, or it's paid in full, or pay on delivery. Delivery, what we're meaning here, and based on your company, you may be delivering items that are large items that they can't trailer or whatever, and you take them to a site, like a job site. For example, deliver to site. There's a cost for that. For example, if you deliver to site, that would be a new line item you would charge for it. And in respect to putting it in the listing for the note items that are dropped down here, you would want to have that in there. And when you're creating the first few records, you're going to learn a little bit about what you need specific to the kind of business that you're running. And as I'm closing this particular 2 items here in the description of them, as we stated before, I think I have workarounds for about everything you can think of, because in the lists shown over here, you have a lot of flexibility to add things and modify them as you have to, as far as the requirements for changing these lists. Like here's the billing notes, and these are all the different items that we were talking about in that list. If you add a new one and then put it in there and it fits your needs better, because as you create the app information in your first few days of setting up the application, you can either delete or add these things. Now, I want to point out, once you start using these items, don't delete them, because what that means is any of the items that you use here that you take out and delete going on after you first started using the application, if you used them once, if you take them out now, it's going to orphan that particular item wherever you used it at. It's going to take it out because it's no longer in the list. Okay, so be aware of that. So be prudent when you're taking and making changes in these particular items, that you do have the sense to know that if you're going to use them once, then leave them in there forever. Okay, that being said, let's go to the next things we're going to be covering, and these are pretty straightforward. I'm going to talk about these and supporting data. Then we're going to come back and we're going to look at what we didn't cover in all these items, and we're going to create a video for that. And I'll follow up by saying this too: if new things are done on the application and you're not aware of them, or I have support questions where it makes sense, I'm going to create a new video called All New Items, or something to the words of that effect. So when you go back, you can look at the videos and see what's changed, what new things have been added to the application, or things that have come in for support questions. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next video now, and we'll talk about client location and other locations and data, supporting data. Okay.